You are surrounded by fools, and it is exhausting. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way movies portray the tortured genius, packing in a dimly lit room. No, it is exhausting in the quietest, most ordinary way, in meetings where someone repeats the same wrong idea louder, hopping volume will substitute for logic. In conversations where you watch a person argue with facts they have never bothered to verify. In moments where you realize, with a slow and sinking clarity, that the person across from you is not interested in truth. They are interested in winning, and those are two very different games. Arthur saw this. He saw it with a sharpness that made him one of the most brutally honest philosophers who ever lived. He wrote that the vast majority of people move through life not by thinking, but by reacting, by feeling, by grabbing onto the nearest comfortable belief and defending it with the ferocity of someone who has confused opinion with identity. He called it what it was. He did not dress it in polite language. And that honesty cost him socially, but it freed him intellectually. Here is the painful irony that no one warns you about. The smarter you become, the more unbearable the world gets. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Your mind sharpens, your pattern recognition deepens. You start seeing the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the ignorance that most people have learned to comfortably ignore. And suddenly, what others brush off as just how people are becomes something you cannot unsee. It is like being handed a pair of glasses that reveal every crack in the wall. At first, you think it is a gift. Then you realize you still have to live in the building. And so you try, you explain, you reason, you lay out the argument with patience and precision, quietly confident that logic will land, that clarity will cut through, that if you just find the right words, the right angle, the right moment, the person in front of you will finally understand. But they do not. They push back harder, they misquote you, they change the subject, they appeal to emotions, to authority, to things that have nothing to do with the conversation. And you sit there, watching the entire structure of reason collapse in real time, feeling something that is not quite anger and not quite sadness, but lives somewhere painfully in between. Had a name for this feeling too. He understood that the intelligent person does not just suffer from the world's stupidity, they suffer from their own expectations of it, from the belief, however small, that people will choose reason when given the chance. That belief, he argued, is the real trap, not the fool across from you, your own stubborn faith in their potential. So what do you do when reason fails to reach the unreasonable? That is exactly where the answer begins, and it is nothing like what you expect. You have two choices when you are surrounded by unreasonable people. You can fight them, or you can outthink them. Who spent a lifetime studying the mechanics of human irrationality was not interested in fighting. Fighting fools is a dignified man's most undignified mistake, because the moment you step into their arena, the moment you raise your voice, defend your position with emotion, or invest your pride in the outcome of an argument, you have already lost. Not the argument, something far more valuable. You have lost your position above it. So instead, he offered something sharper, something colder, three weapons that do not look like weapons at all until they work. The first weapon, silence. Silence is not the absence of a response. It is the most deliberate response available to an intelligent mind. When a fool speaks nonsense and expects your reaction, expects you to correct them, challenge them, engage with them, your silence does something their logic cannot process. It denies them the battle entirely. Understood that most irrational people are not looking for truth. They are looking for friction, for an opponent, for the electric charge of conflict that makes them feel significant. Your engagement, even your intelligent, well-reasoned engagement, feeds that need. It validates the fight as worth having. It tells them, without words, that they are on your level. Silence says otherwise. There is a particular kind of power in looking at someone's argument, understanding it completely, seeing every flaw within it, and choosing to say nothing. Not because you have no answer, but because they have not earned one. That restraint, practiced with consistency, becomes something people feel without being able to name. They sense they are not reaching you, and that is far more unsettling to a fool than any counterargument you could construct. The second weapon, the mirror trap. Sometimes silence is not available. Sometimes you are in a room, in a debate, in a situation where you must respond. And this is where most elegant strategy lives, a technique so subtle it appears, on the surface, like agreement. You agree with the fool, completely, enthusiastically even. You take their logic, accept it entirely, and then you simply follow it further than they intended to go. You extend their argument to its natural conclusion. You let it run until it collapses beneath its own absurdity. No mockery needed, no visible sarcasm. You simply become a mirror, reflecting their own thinking back at them, and when a foolish idea it destroys itself. The person who built it is left standing in the rubble of their own reasoning, and everyone watching understands what just happened, except, perhaps, the fool themselves. This is not cruelty, it is precision. Believed that the highest form of intellectual combat was not to overpower an opponent, but to make them overpower themselves, to hand them the rope and step aside. There is no argument that lands harder than the one a person makes against their own position without realizing it. The third weapon, emotional detachment. This is the hardest one, and it is the most important. Argued that the intelligent person's greatest vulnerability is not their opponent's stupidity, it is their own emotional investment in correcting it. Every time you feel frustration rising in an argument, every time your jaw tightens because someone refuses to see reason, every time you lose sleep over a conversation that went nowhere, you are paying a tax. A tax on your energy, your clarity, and your peace. And the fool who provoked it pays nothing. The solution is not indifference born from coldness. It is detachment born from understanding. When you truly internalize that most people are operating from a completely different set of cognitive tools, shaped by fear, ego, limited experience, and the desperate need to be right, something shifts. You stop expecting a hammer to function like a scalpel. You stop being surprised when it does not. You begin to observe human irrationality the way a scientist observes a natural phenomenon, with curiosity, with distance, even, occasionally, with a dark and quiet amusement. The anger dissolves, not because the foolishness disappears, but because you have removed yourself as its target. And when you are no longer emotionally available to be destabilized, something remarkable happens. You become unreachable, not arrogant, not cold, simply unmoved. And an unmoved, intelligent mind is the most formidable thing a fool will ever fail to understand. 3 weapons, no raised voices, no wasted pride, no scorched energy spent on battles that were never worth winning. Just silence, precision, and the calm of someone who has decided, quietly, finally, and completely, that their peace is worth more than their point. Which brings the only question that matters. If you are no longer spending yourself on fools, what do you do with everything you have saved? There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when something shifts inside an intelligent person who has finally stopped fighting wars that were never theirs to win. It does not arrive with fanfare, no dramatic revelation, no sudden flood of clarity. It comes the way dawn comes, gradually, and then all at once. One day you realize that the argument you walked away from last Tuesday did not haunt you the way arguments used to. That the person who tried to provoke you in that meeting got nothing from you, not anger, not even a flicker of visible reaction. And in the space where that wasted energy used to live, something else has quietly moved in. Focus. This is where philosophy stops being about other people entirely and becomes about you. Because here is what no one tells you about the war with fools. It is designed to keep you exactly where you are. Every argument you are pulled into is time subtracted from your own vision. Every emotional spiral triggered by someone else's ignorance is energy that will not be available when you sit down to build, to think, to create. The fool does not know they are doing this to you. That is almost the worst part. There is no conspiracy. Just the natural gravity of low-level chaos pulling everything around it downward, including you, if you allow it. Spent years in voluntary isolation. He was difficult, antisocial, and unapologetically selective about where he directed his attention. History has judged him harshly for his temperament, but history also preserved his ideas for nearly 2 centuries, because while others were performing for crowds, he was building something that lasted. He understood, with uncomfortable clarity, that a mind is a finite resource, that attention is currency, and that spending it on the undeserving is not generosity, it is waste. The thing an intelligent person can do is treat their own mind like the most valuable thing they own, because it is. And so the redirection begins. Not with grand gestures, not with a public declaration that you are done with nonsense. Quietly, internally, you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what they think of you. You stop seeking validation from rooms that were never built to appreciate what you carry. You stop measuring your progress by the understanding of people who have not done the work to understand. Instead, you turn inward and then forward. You ask different questions, not why can't they see what I see, but what can I build with what I see, not how do I make them understand, but what becomes possible when I stop needing them to. These are not small shifts in language. They are complete transformations in direction. One road leads you in circles around other people's limitations. The other leads somewhere only you can go. Believe that the truly wise person answers to one authority above all others, their own mind, not the crowd, not the critics, not the approval of people whose they do not respect. The highest court, he argued, is the one inside you. And when you start living by that standard, when you stop outsourcing your sense of worth to the reactions of others, something extraordinary becomes possible. You become free. Not the loud, celebrated freedom of someone who has won a public argument. That is not freedom, that is relief. Temporary, fragile, dependent on someone else's defeat. No, this is something quieter and far more durable. The freedom of a person who no longer needs the last word, who no longer flinches at misunderstanding, who has built something so internally solid that the chaos outside simply cannot find a way in. This is what was pointing toward, underneath all the pessimism and the sharp edges of his prose, not despair at human stupidity, but liberation from the need to fix it, the recognition that your energy, your vision, your singular and irreplaceable mind, these things were never meant to be spent on people who will not grow. They were meant to be spent on the work, on the ideas, on the slow and quiet construction of a life that reflects who you actually are, rather than who the noise around you tried to make you become. While fools argue in circles, and they always will, the intelligent person has already left the room, not in defeat, not in anger, but with the calm, unhurried certainty of someone who has somewhere better to be. They are building, they are thinking, they are moving in silence, in focus, in the direction of everything that actually matters. True power was never about winning the argument. It was about being so consumed by your own purpose, so anchored in your own vision, that the argument simply stops being worth having. That is the lesson left behind, not a manual for defeating fools, but a blueprint for outgrowing the need to. And it starts the moment you decide, finally, firmly, and without apology, that your mind is too valuable to be anyone else's battlefield. You are surrounded by fools, and it is exhausting. Yes, but only for as long as you keep letting them matter.